Good morning and welcome to Coffee Chat. I'm Chris Waddell for NACTV, and I have the good fortune to have a wonderful guest who has just completed a book, Beverly Hicks. And are you in Brandon?
I live in Brandon,
You
yes.
live in Brandon, and it is. I'm going to let her introduce the book, and then we'll get into the conversation. Beverly, would you tell us about what you've done?
Sure, thank you very much, Chris. What this is about, I wrote this book for the celebration of 100 years of psychiatric nursing in Manitoba. And you may or may not be aware that psychiatric nursing was first established in Brandon Mental Hospital in 1923. The first graduates of a program that came out with a diploma was certainly in Western Canada and possibly in all of the rest of Canada, where these 7 young women gained a diploma that called them psychiatric nurses. And this happened in the auditorium at the old Brandon Mental Hospital on the 21st of June, 1923. So the book and the documentary that we're going to talk about tries to cover that 100 years of what happened right up till the class of Brandon University. Now, maybe you don't know, maybe other people don't know, that Brandon University was the first university in Canada to offer a baccalaureate degree in psychiatric nursing. So Brandon has always been a pioneer in psychiatric nursing education.
Okay, so there's a lot of work has gone into this book, Politics, Personalities, and Persistence. 100 Years of Psychiatric Nursing Education in Manitoba. And I know you've interviewed a lovely lady who lives in Neepawa, Vivian Hildebrand,
Mm-hmm.
and what's her background?
Well, Vivian is probably the oldest psychiatric nurse who was able to be interviewed, and she lives in Neepawa, as you say, and she practiced psychiatric nursing in the 1950s. And so the documentary that we're going to talk about, she is the first person we talked to. So it gave us a long view of 100 years of psychiatric nursing, starting with what was it like to practice psychiatric nursing in the 1950s.
Okay, now I'll get back into why you're doing this, but I have watched the documentary that has been done, and the people at Westman Communications have done a marvelous job, as well as all the interviewers and interviewees. It is well worth, it's most of an hour, and it is extremely good. It will be aired. Thank you to WCG here on NACTV, and that will be shown. So we're quite excited about that. I was able to watch it on my computer this morning, and I was just thrilled with how well it was done. It was just, the history was just absolutely amazing, and the video will speak for itself. There's so much history there. If I was to try and talk about it, I would mess it up, because there is just about medications and treatments and explained in a way that we can understand it differently, because we all have been touched by mental health issues, and we've all have opinions on mental health issues. And like opinions are like noses, everyone has one, and some are better noses than others. So,
and that's what we tried to accomplish in the documentary, was that over this 100 years, psychiatric nurses have been able to adapt and change and modify and keep up to date with all the latest information and latest practices. And so we will see what Vivian is talking about in the 1950s, though that wasn't the beginning. 1923 was the beginning of the profession. And then right up to the class who is graduating from Brandon University in 2023. And so over that 100-year span, how the practice has changed and adapted.
And it is fascinating. Now, what brought you, now you did a dissertation, and I believe it was 2011, so it's, I've got it right here.
I think it was, yeah, I think
you
so.
probably were working.
28, I think it was.
Yeah, because you would have been working on it for a long time
right.
for it to happen. And it's, the title of it is Gender, Politics, and Regionalism, Factors in the Evolution of Registered Psychiatric Nursing in Manitoba from 1920 to 1960.
That was an article that was written about, yeah.
Okay, and
so my dissertation was called From Barnyards to Bedsides to Books and Beyond, and it was about psychiatric nursing from 1955 to 1980. And you may wonder why I used the title Barnyards to Bedsides to Books, because the very earliest days of psychiatric nursing practice was in the farming environments where the mental hospitals, usually most of them, had a farm attached to them. And very often the patients would be caring for the farm, for the livestock, and so on. And so the nursing staff or the attending staff would be working alongside them. And there was as much care being provided in the barnyard as there was on the wards. But then that movement changed. They tried to get away from the patients working in the farms, though not everybody agreed that was a good thing, because the patients who worked there had a sense of purpose. They got up, they went to work every day, and they felt good about that. But then it changed to more of a sort of a nursing model, which is, and our image of nurses is that they care for people who are sick in bed. Well, so, and that they tried to show that psychiatry and psychiatric nursing was like regular nursing, where people were sick and laying in bed, which is not the case with psychiatric patients. And so then, and then as the profession progressed, it became more academic. There was more knowledge to learn, and eventually it wound up as a professional program in a university, which indicated there needs to be a lot of knowledge that the psychiatric nurses have.
But you do say that the barnyard aspect of it was beneficial, and I think of people who have support animals. They're not seeing eye dogs, but they're emotional support animals.
There are, yes.
And we certainly saw a rise of that during the lockdown and pandemic. People really needed that animal to care for, a reason to get up in the morning. And are they going back to that at all?
Well, I don't know that we're going to have people in large institutions where there's going to be large farms and gardens, which it used to be like. It's a different
era.
But there certainly are some areas where they believe that working in gardens, in the outdoors, in having a purpose in life is good for people.
And we see people go into depression when I'm not good for anything anymore. We hear, why am I still alive?
Yes.
It's an elderly person that isn't capable of doing the things they once did, and so they feel they've lost some purpose. So what is your background? Are you a Manitoban? Are you
No, originally I am from New Zealand, and I came in the 1960s to Brandon to actually take a psychiatric nursing course, which was being run at Brandon Mental Hospital. I came for 6 months, and I'm still here over 50 years later.
I think your visitor's visa has expired.
I think so, and I just fell in love with psychiatric nursing. And so then I became involved. I was teaching. I got a university degree, and it just kind of went from there. And my career ended teaching in the program at Brandon University.
Okay.
We were very aware, all of us who were involved knew that Brandon University was special because it was the first university in the country that accepted psychiatric nurses and offered a degree in psychiatric nursing. And that was in 1986. It was called a post-diploma degree, where people who already had their diploma in psychiatric nursing could add a couple more years at the university and get a degree. And then in about 1994, the first 4-year degree, so all psychiatric nurses in Manitoba are all now trained at the university. So it's a 4-year degree.
It's a 4-year degree now.
Mm-hmm.
The institutions, the large institutions, were shut down because what were the numbers that were in what we affectionately in this area call the North Hill,
Right.
In Brandon? What were the numbers of people in there being treated at the height of numbers?
At the height of numbers, it would have been in the 1950s or 1960s, and I think it was about 1,500 patients at that time. And there was 3 huge buildings, and actually there was 4 because there was one up near the highway. But gradually, people somehow had the idea when we started in 1992 talking about mental health reform. People had the idea that we were going to open the doors and 1,500 people were going to spill onto the streets of Brandon. Well, it wasn't like that at all. The population had gradually been reducing from about the 1960s to the 1990s. When we started the idea of mental health reform, of closing the institution, it wasn't closed suddenly. There was a plan, and there was certainly a plan for each individual patient who had a plan about where they were going to live, what they were going to do, what their activities were going to be.
Well, I think that's where we get into the politics of it.
Absolutely.
And I did mention that before we started the interview, and there were some strong words went around about what you just said, opening the doors and 1,500 people flooding onto the streets who had issues that were being dealt with in an institution, but there weren't 1,500 people.
No, not by the 1990s. I think it was maybe 400 or 500 by there. By the time it closed, and so people, 1 or 2 at a time, were being placed in situations in communities, some in their own homes, some in group homes. And it was a very gradual. And so by the time, the last patients left, there was 3 or 4 children left who were going to be placed in the new children's unit. There was a new child and adolescent unit built in Brandon.
Okay.
So there was many small units built through Brandon and Westman.
Is there still that going on?
Absolutely. The child and adolescent unit in Brandon has, I think, about 20 beds. I'm not sure. I think it's about 20 beds. There's the Center for Adult Psychiatry, which I think maybe 25 or 30. Dauphin has a few beds. Thompson has some beds. So it was moving people and spreading them closer to their own homes. So if you were in Thompson, why would you have to go to Brandon for treatment?
Yes, it takes you away from any natural support, any family support, friends that would support you. So it was a move to help people even more than they were helped. Now, right now, mental health issues are dealt with by local doctors referring to the clinics, but it takes place in our area mostly up in the Assiniboine Centre and in the wing that's to the north of the Assiniboine Center in Brandon?
Yes, that's called the Center for Adult Psychiatry. It's called
Okay,
CAP.
that I couldn't
Yep.
remember. I've been to visit, but I
Yeah.
couldn't remember the proper name.
And then the elderly population, and a lot in Brandon, there was a lot of elderly people who had grown old in the mental hospital.
Okay.
And so there was a new nursing home called Rideau Park, which took 100 patients out of the mental hospital, placed them in this new nursing home, which was specially built by the old jail.
And I have visited in that because my sister, as an elderly person who could no longer look after herself physically, was there. And it is a beautiful building.
Yes.
It is
Yep.
beautifully laid out and in light and bright. And the care now it is a personal care home. But it is extremely welcoming and warm.
Yes.
And so it was a well laid out building, because when was that built?
That was built in the early 1990s.
Okay.
In order to accommodate some of those people who were moving out of the Brandon Mental Hospital.
Transitioning them
Yep.
into a place where they could be cared for and
Differently.
differently. Okay, that is really fascinating to know that history, because I know it was a political issue, but it was an emotional issue for people who didn't know what was going on. And, I'll bite my tongue and not say things that might go through my mind sometimes, and it was wonderful.
There was a lot of misunderstanding. People, I mean, I was asked sometimes, well, what do you do? Do you just send people out? Well, no. Every single person had a plan in place. So where are you going to live? What are you going to do? Different housing options were set up for people. There was an apartment building in Brandon called Community Welcome.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard
I've
of that.
heard of it,
and
yes.
I think there's maybe 10 or 12 apartments in that building where people could live independently, but it was attached to a recreation center. It had an office and staff. So if you weren't feeling well, or you needed some help, you could go down to the office and say, I need to see my mental health worker. I need to have my medication changed. And so there was there's staff right on site at Community Welcome.
Okay, I know the term proctor came up in the little synopsis,
It
and
does.
I know people. I do know people who have acted as proctor. What is the role of a proctor?
A proctor is a person who does not have a professional degree, but they're usually people who are smart, and they're friendly. They're friends with the patient, but they also know how to watch out for them. So everybody has a community mental health worker, and so the proctor may go into the person's home, help with housework, help with meals, monitor medication, have you taken your medication today? If they notice something amiss with the person, perhaps they're not getting up and getting dressed, their personal hygiene is deteriorating, which is sometimes a sign of depression. So then they would notify the mental health worker, I think you need to come and see Joe because he doesn't seem to be doing so well. Sometimes the proctor would take them grocery shopping, or they might take them out to bingo.
I know they take them out to coffee.
Yeah, right.
And because I happen to know of a relationship where a friend had a proctor, and just a lovely person. The person who had the proctor was a lovely person, but the proctor was an exceptional individual, and who knows how often we've sat in a restaurant and not realized who these two friends are.
Having coffee together.
Or going to a baseball game or a hockey game, and so that certainly was a real benefit to the person who needed the help, but also to the community at large. Now, going back to the very history, when you say, I saw that there was a line in the synopsis that I read earlier that Western Canada was different. Manitoba was more Western Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
You want to elaborate on that?
Well, that's true. Like psychiatric nursing as a registered profession only exists in the 4 Western provinces.
Oh.
People are cared in Eastern Canada, though Nova Scotia right now is kind of looking at something similar. They're general nurses who may or may not have had any specialized training in psychiatric nursing. They care for patients who are in psychiatric units or institutions or wherever. The argument made by the psychiatric nurses of Western Canada is we take 4 years to get our psychiatric nursing degree, and so we have all of these skills. Now, the difference between East and West, I said it in my dissertation, I think it's geography and politics, because the way Eastern and Western Canada divide at the Manitoba-Ontario border,
Yes.
there's just such a difference in the culture. And so the nurses and the nursing bodies and the senior high-ups did not want to have this separate profession, whereas in Western Canada, and a lot of it was led by men who said, no, we need a separate and distinct profession, and really dug their heels in and fought to have this separate and distinct profession.
Now, when you talk about geography, my husband Ken and I have had a lot of interesting discussions in the past, because when Western Canada was settled, it was on the square mile grid, and you had your 80 acres that you started with, or your quarter section, and you were separated often, and in not just Western Canada, but the Western US. Women in particular were isolated. If they came from an area that was highly populated and they had a support group around them, even if they were from a village and they had a support group around them, all of a sudden they were out on their own, and they were fortunate if they could see the smoke from their neighbor's chimney.
Right.
And we've always, in a layman's way of looking at things, thought that isolation probably contributed to a lot of mental health problems.
We've heard that, yes. I've heard that isolation. I don't have any figures to support that, and yet intuitively it sort of makes sense.
And anecdotally, and when you think of how in Eastern Canada a lot of things were set up on the river lot system, so
there were narrow lots. And so your homes, when the Mennonite brethren emigrated to Western Canada, they had special compensation that they could have their old village unit and have that support unit system
together. So, but you read mostly fictional stories of a woman coming, a war bride after World War I, coming from Great Britain or Europe, and her husband's told her he has this ranch. Well, the ranch is a sod hut with
right,
and
straw on the roof,
2 miles from the nearest.
Yeah. I believe I called an article Gender, Politics and Regionalism, which were factors, because the gender, men were very strong in psychiatric nursing. At one time, there was about 50% of the staff were male, because the male patients were segregated, so they needed men to take care of them. They were educated, they received the same education as the nurses, as the female nurses. They were often called attendants, but they received an education as well.
Well, and the fact that they were segregated in their training, like the men didn't, they were separate classes.
Yes, up until about the 1960s, they were educated separately.
And I found that fascinating, and that's, when you're 74 years old, that's recent history.
Yes.
No, it's just fascinating how that's all come together. Now this book will be available for sale.
Yes, it is. This book is available for sale at, you can get it at Paul Michael's up at the lake, or in Brandon, it's at Lady of the Lake.
Okay.
And or I think my email is there. You can call me.
And your email will be shown, and
email.
You there'll be an ad in the Neepawa Banner and Press as well.
And then the other thing that we're doing to celebrate at the Curve Gallery at Brandon University in the library, there's a display of photos showing psychiatric nursing as it's looked over the 100 years. There's also a display down at the Brandon Museum and Art Gallery, which is down on 9th Street.
Yes.
And not the art gallery, the archives, I think.
Oh,
it's
the
called
archives.
Brandon Museum and Archives.
Is it the city center? No, that's a
No,
different building.
Further down on 9th Street.
9th.
Yeah,
Okay.
down towards Pacific
So there is
Avenue.
a display there.
So we've tried to celebrate in different ways 100 years of psychiatric nursing.
All right. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, and I really thank you for coming over to Neepawa. This isn't the first time you've been to Neepawa to do things, and I know that Levi went with you to Kinsman Courts to interview
the oldest psychiatric nurse.
The oldest psychiatric
nurse we could find who was still able to, discuss.
And she is very lucid. It was
very
what I've seen of it. And maybe we can put a little bit of that at the end. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for asking me.
I'm just thrilled that you came and that you've written the book. How much is it costing?
Well, I think it's $24 up at the lake in Paul Michael's.
But there's a lot of history here, and it's beautifully done by Friesenstown in southern Manitoba.
Right.
And it's well documented. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and thank you, Beverly. And so watch for the other videos, and we'll see a little clip of part of the interview with Vivian Hildebrand, our own local lovely lady.
So Monday at 8 o'clock and Wednesday at 3:15. It's on this channel.
Okay, that it's on NAC TV. This we have programmed, so it will be on more. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who watches and supports us. You can always volunteer. It's not a hard job. And we'll say good day for August 1st.
Thank you.